We're here to talk about why Gibraltar is the best place to bring your fintech business. And we're going to very candidly talk about what the advantages and disadvantages of Gibraltar are for a range of businesses. But obviously, I'm mostly interested in crypto, but we have other things to talk about. Let me just, to kick this off, let me just ask Johan to discuss the most obvious advantage from the regulatory and tax side about coming to Gibraltar.
Okay, Felix.
Yeah, there we go.
I think we've heard from the Chief Minister, Minister Isola, and from Sean. We have a picture in terms of Gibraltar's proposition around our focus on regulation, reputation, our focus on attracting quality business into Gibraltar, speed to market, and our cost effectiveness. But I think one of the aspects that we haven't really touched on yet is our taxation and our fiscal regime. And in the context of ICOs and token launches, I think I'd just like to sort of highlight some of the issues from a taxation perspective and some of the key questions that we're seeing. So in terms of token launches, the first question is the GIB SPV that is running the ICO, what is the tax implication at token launch? The analysis around that question is well, what are you actually selling? What goods or services are you providing at that point in time? Well, what we have generally is a token. It's a utility token. That token will allow you access to an IT platform that may or may not have been built at the point in time of launch. So the question is, you don't actually have a sale of a good or a service. So there is no revenue, there is no trading revenue at that point in time. Because there is no trading revenue at that point in time, there isn't any actual tax liability at that point in time. So how does the entity record that transaction? Well, you're recognizing the asset, which is the cryptocurrency proceeds, the Ether or the Bitcoin that you've received. So that's the asset. How do we actually account for the credit side? Well, clearly it's not equity, because all of the white papers go out of their way to structure themselves so that the tokens are not equity, they're not securities. So the credit isn't to equity, it's not debt. So what you have in substance is a prepayment for future goods and services, and those future goods and services are access to the IT platform which the ICO is looking to develop.
Sorry to interrupt, but how about tokens which are equity? Because we are seeing regulatory space for those, and some of those may pop up. In fact, many of those will pop up against their wishes because they will be classified as equity.
From an accounting perspective, they're equity. They're treated as equity as they've always been. So the credits, share capital, share premium, that's a capital transaction. There's no tax payable on that. So we're really talking about where we have utility tokens. So on that basis, there's no tax liability at launch. The question then is where do you refer that credit? That credit we hold on the balance sheet as deferred revenue. And then the next question and the next issue becomes, how does that revenue feed through to the profit and loss account? And the issue there is you need to consider the point in time at which the IT platform becomes operational and it's made available to users. And then the question is around the timing of the recognition. So are those tokens actually spent and recovered, or are those tokens have some sort of long life or indefinite life? So if the tokens are spent, you recognize the revenue as that service is provided and as those token holders use the platform. If you have an indefinite life, then you've got a challenge as to how long a period do you spread that revenue across the profit and loss account.
Right, so to move away from the tokens for a minute, I'd like to ask Brent about other traditional, if we can say that, fintech business here in Gibraltar, and what do you think the main advantages are being here as opposed to, say, London?
Yeah, so I think the main advantage, certainly for us at Wavecrest, has been really the entire innovative ecosystem. For us being a technology company, that was really important, and it does start with the regulator. And I think Albert really made some good points earlier today, talking about the positioning of the regulator here, where you find this balance of really supporting innovative technologies, but while also ensuring companies are doing it the right way. And for us, that was really important because we wanted a regulator that would support that forward thinking and that innovation, but that we could also go out around the world and use that license really as a stamp to show that you are coming from a strong regulator as well. And I think Gibraltar historically has demonstrated that across a number of industries, starting with gaming, where you really see an emphasis on quality over quantity. And I think that's been really important for us in the fintech space to be able to go out and say, not only are you a licensed e-money institution, but you're licensed in a jurisdiction that has not just opened its doors to everyone, that has taken a very serious approach to keeping out the players you don't want and letting in the players that are operating the right way. So for us, that's probably been the main benefit of Gibraltar is being a part of that sort of ecosystem where you have the forward-thinking innovation, but you also have that strong reputation of a jurisdiction that wants to keep the right operators in.
Innovation and focus on quality. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Mo?
I think sort of Johan and Brent have actually covered most of the points, but I think practicality is a very important issue here. Gibraltar has managed successfully to set up the gaming industry, which is a similar ilk of with respect to the high-tech industry, which is now the fintech industry now we are facing. And that sort of practical sort of pathway being undertaken is something which speaks for itself. It's not something which is an idea, concept. It's something which has actually happened. The regulator, the regulation, the accessibility of the regulator in Gibraltar is something which we haven't really mentioned, and it's actually connected to the speed to regulation, the speed to get a license. In other jurisdictions, the actual time it takes to actually get a license is sometimes very, very long and cumbersome. In Gibraltar, the regulator, as you saw earlier today, the regulator is very dynamic, is very sort of approachable, and they're actually asking people to come in and speak to them about their ideas. Where in the world do you actually find that? And it's actually a real invitation. And that's something which they want to know about you. They'll actually tell you whether you are within the scope of the regulation in Gibraltar or whether you're outside the scope. And all these practical considerations will facilitate somebody either deciding Gibraltar is not the place for them or Gibraltar is actually the place for them. Apart from that, then we've got the fiscal aspects, and being close to the government is also very important to find out what tax position you might take. You might decide to take a different tax position, different tax ruling in terms of a dual tax situation, for example, outside and inside Gibraltar, having some trading, and that can actually help you from a net tax perspective. Gibraltar has a 10% tax rate, which is much more attractive than other jurisdictions in the world, and that can actually be reduced when you've got a dual tax situation. So I think all in all, practically, we've actually sort of gone down that path with gaming, we've gone down the path with many other types of businesses to date, but I think now Brexit might, we're not really sure about it, Brexit might close some doors. It's certainly going to open this door.
Well, if I could just add to, in terms of the gaming and the insurance space for our guests from outside Gibraltar, Gibraltar insurers insure 1 in 5 motor vehicles in the UK, and I think that gives you a sense of the space that we occupy in the motor insurance market. And from a gaming perspective, we have maintained licensees under 30 in total, and you'll see Bwin, Party, Ladbrokes, Corals, so household names that you see on shirts of Premiership football teams. Coming back to the taxation point, Mo mentioned the corporate tax rate. So Gibraltar fiscal regime is centered around the low tax jurisdiction. We have a 10% corporate tax rate, so firms that are DLT and will need to be licensed under DLT, all of their profits will be caught within the Gibraltar net and will be subject to tax at 10% with the usual deductions for expenses wholly and exclusively incurred in the production of income. Which I think is, internationally is a very attractive fiscal proposition from a corporate tax perspective. But the other aspect that we also need to factor in is the personal tax perspective. So you're looking at setting up your vehicle in Gibraltar. You'll be considering whether you move existing staff, whether you yourselves as UBOs, as senior management, want to move across to Gibraltar. So as you come into the Gibraltar tax net, personal tax is something that you will need to consider. And again, in that respect, Gibraltar has a very attractive proposition. The maximum effective rate is 25%. And we also have a special category, which is a HEPS status. So the company, the Gibraltar company, can actually apply for individuals who have specialist skills. And that actually caps your employment income at 120,000, which ends up at just under 30,000 tax payable. So that's a particular tax break, if you like, that we've had there for many years in order to be able to attract talent to Gibraltar.
And yeah, it's just quickly worth noting, and Mo, I'm so glad you brought up the accessibility because that's really, really important here. And it's actually the reason why we're all sitting here today for this conference. I think most people hear about the new DLT framework, and I think a lot of credit goes to Sean and the FSC for how quickly they've moved on this. But what a lot of people don't know is that the reason we got to that point was, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, an industry group actually went to the government and went to the regulator and said, this is a trend we're seeing in the financial services space. This is something that Gibraltar, as a small but adaptive jurisdiction, should start looking into and learning about. And it's only because those last 3 or 4 years that we're now in a position to move quickly on regulation. And it's because of that accessibility of both the government and the regulator that allowed that. I think other jurisdictions around the world are playing catch up now because they didn't have that level of accessibility and interaction with industry that Gibraltar had 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I would actually even add further to that our size is very important in this, because other jurisdictions where the population is much larger than Gibraltar, by the time you get to know different members of different authorities, it's difficult just to get to speak to the right people. Being small is just being much more practical and accessible, and that is real, and it's something which Brent and Johan have actually expressed and has been expressed before.
How about the disadvantages of being small? What kinds of problems do you find that maybe in terms of talent, in terms of communication, in terms of accessibility to other things that companies need? Have you found any problems on that front?
I think that, coming back to the size point, that makes us more agile in a very fast-moving space. I think that the answer to that is that, and this is something that we pride ourselves at EY. We're a small team by any sort of office standards at 35. However, our view is that we're a gateway to the rest of the EY firm in terms of connecting and bringing in the talent and the expertise in what is a very fast-moving technological environment.
I think talent is a challenge, but it's a challenge which we have succumbed over time. Once again, in the different industries, not only in the gaming industry, it's all in the financial services industry. Talent is something which you need in a services environment, and we, perhaps around this room, very few are actually local Gibraltarians, and actually sort of it reflects the exact point that not only Do we want to have people like yourselves in Gibraltar? Gibraltar welcomes you, not only from a tax perspective, but I hope you feel, other than the weather, of course, that the weather, apart from today, is not great, but other than the weather, Gibraltar is a very welcoming environment. People like to live in Gibraltar directly, even though it's very small, and that's something which is very personal for people. Or people would like to live in Spain, which is just next door, and you've got a massive country there for you to actually enjoy in different ways. And I think that's very important. We are at a very important point in the geography. If you want to spend more time after work or outside, you work to enjoy yourself in Africa, North Africa, or in Spain or in Portugal. Everything is very accessible, and people over time, once again, have actually shown that Gibraltar is a place to be. Yes, we do find it challenging to find the right people, but just with a bit more time, lead time to get them down here. And they normally stay here whether they've got a job initially or not.
And I think it's human nature. We probably always find something to complain about anywhere. And particularly in a small jurisdiction, you're always going to have the challenges of difficulty in finding talent, even if you find them, where you're going to house them, the ability to relocate them, challenges around office space, hotel space. And I think, these are things that, because it's a small jurisdiction, we still complain about today. But I rewind to when I first came to Gibraltar 8 years ago, and we were complaining about the same things then. But you look around now, and the number of people who come with financial services or payments backgrounds has increased significantly. 8 years ago, there was no Sunborn. Ocean Village wasn't open. There was no World Trade Center. So while we can always find these things to complain about, if you actually look at the progress Gibraltar's made over the last 5-10 years, and even before then with online gaming, it's very impressive. And you see the jurisdiction actually addressing those challenges that we have, and that will continue. And I think it's difficult once we've been here for a while, and obviously you guys have been here much longer than I have. You sort of get used to it, and maybe you don't appreciate the changes as they happen. But when you take a step back, those improvements are there. And it's still a small jurisdiction, and we'll still have the challenges that come with that. But when you see the progress Gibraltar's made over the last several years, you see a jurisdiction that's serious about addressing those needs of the industry.
Yeah. Just on the growth point, Brent. I can speak for myself. Having moved away from as a partner in Deloitte's, setting up what is RSM today. We started with 2 people, and now we've got just over 35 people. So I think, and most of them are not Gibraltarians. So it just shows practically what you can actually do over time.
And there are some regulatory requirements around licensing and having senior management and minded management in Gibraltar. But from an IT development perspective, there are no sort of limitations in terms of being able to outsource to wherever your tech hub is, be that in Berlin or in Israel. So it's important to understand that isn't a limiting factor. What we're talking about here is about setting up your headquarters and your licensing framework, if you like. There is scope to have that ecosystem outside of Gibraltar, whilst we actually generate that ecosystem here. And I think Nick mentioned earlier about the university and the center of excellence, so that we can actually bring people and train them to then feed in through the ecosystem. So it's not just people relocating to Gibraltar, it's actually people coming in and being trained locally in the jurisdiction.
Sorry, may I just ask the audience to raise your hands if you've come in from outside Gibraltar? Most people here. So then I have to make the obligatory Brexit question. How do you think that's going to impact Gibraltar's attractiveness as a financial centre?
I think
If you're here, you hear that question every day, but if you're not here, you probably wanted answers. So.
the microphone is not working. No, I think Brexit hit us in Gibraltar initially, and we've actually got over it, I feel. Gibraltar, like the UK, is, although we still don't know where Brexit is going to take us, but let's say we take the most pessimistic view, where there's going to be a hard Brexit close. And that will actually close certain doors for Gibraltar, but like everything else, certain doors will close and other doors will open. The one thing which is very important is that Gibraltar, so far, has been promised by the UK direct access into the UK, and what today might be Gibraltar offering passporting services to other European jurisdictions, tomorrow might actually offer Gibraltar a direct passage to the UK with all the regulatory, with all the fiscal attractions, and we've mentioned before all the other attractions Gibraltar does have for an access to the UK for financial services. So maybe we don't passport into the rest of Europe, but maybe the rest of Europe uses Gibraltar to passport into the UK.
That would be a particular point, Mo, if there is actually no deal. So the drawbridge comes up, there's no deal, we revert to WTO rules,
view, yeah.
and then European firms with business, with customers in the UK wanting to service those customers have a choice either to set up a subsidiary and a business in the UK or look to Gibraltar, set up in Gibraltar, and then passport into
That's absolutely right. That's what I meant. So in a sense, that's the worst case scenario.
It could actually be a positive for Gibraltar in that respect.
Absolutely. So one door will close, the other door will open. I feel that the cryptocurrency space is independent of Brexit, and that sort of, once again, will bring quite a bit of focus to Gibraltar in terms of attracting this new industry, which Gibraltar will actually be able to fare pretty well, and maybe we actually forget about Brexit in a few years' time, saying it was something which happened, which forced us to actually open a new industry, which is offering us many more benefits than we even anticipated at the time.
I think the reality is that once the dust settled, it was very, very clear that a lot of the Gibraltar's economy and business is actually UK facing rather than Europe facing. Yes, we have a number of firms that are reliant, but the core. The substantial core of our business is the UK market, and as Mo said, the UK government have promised us continuity. They've also promised that Gibraltar will be added on any other international deals that they secure. So the benefits of those will also accrue to Gibraltar. And then if we take the DLT space and we see the inquiries and the breadth and the depth of the inquiries that we're seeing, particularly from Israel, from the US, from Russia, China, we're talking about significant interest from markets that we weren't doing a lot of business with in what we can see is a growing space. So I think that bodes very well for Gibraltar.
And I would just add quickly, I think you guys represented some of the specific risks, but also opportunities. And I think, again, just stepping back, it speaks a lot about the general business ecosystem in Gibraltar, and one of the main benefits is that adaptive nature, and you get sort of a surprising shock that I think a lot of people felt directly after the vote, but it very quickly turned to this sort of discussion of, okay, let's acknowledge the risks and what may change for the worse, but let's also quickly start identifying what the opportunities are that come out of it, and I think that is a very good encapsulation of Gibraltar as a whole.
So I think there's that entrepreneurial can-do attitude in Gibraltar, which I think rhymes very well with the entrepreneurial spirit in the IT tech sector.
You mentioned becoming more open to the rest of the world. Do you think Gibraltar should start attracting more business from Africa? After all, it's the fastest growing continent. There's a demographic explosion there. Many people talk of Africa being the next place after China. What happened in the last 20 years in China, we could see it happening in Africa now, and Gibraltar could be the key, the entry point for all of that business to the UK, to Europe.
I think absolutely. I think that our focus has been UK and Europe, and I think there's a realization that we need to look further and wider. And given our close links and some existing links with Africa, then that's certainly a market that we are looking to. And I know that there was a delegation led by Minister Isola a few months ago.
I'd really like to open this up for audience questions. So if you have a question from the audience, raise your hand. We'll try and get a mic to you.
Now, you've got to find some more land for all these people who are going to come and set up blockchain businesses. I think we need some adventurous real estate ideas to.
I think there's no member of the government on our panel, but knowing some developers and knowing some government personnel, there are ideas in train in terms of obtaining more space. Well, so thinking about a question, I'd like to add something on the Africa point which you mentioned. I think Africa is certainly a great opportunity for Gibraltar, not only in high tech, but also from a fiscal perspective, from a European penetration perspective, from a general business perspective. But I think one thing which the world needs to get used to, and Africa needs to get used to too, is compliance. Before you can actually accept a person or a corporate from an African country, there is still quite a bit of a bridge in terms of being able to obtain what we normally obtain in Western Europe and the Western side of the world, in terms of the passport and the passport having a date of birth which is not 000, because sometimes they just don't know when they were born in some countries. No, but these are practical considerations which, if you want to open a bank account, even though the firm might have their compliance office and they might actually accept it, but the banks will not accept it. So we need to get over, and they need to get over, how we bridge this compliance challenge.
However, they all have cell phones. So, we can take the security selfies one step further, right?
Absolutely. From a Bitcoin perspective, and for example, in terms of debit cards, etc., a lot of them are getting through it, and they're getting through it below the de minimis levels, etc. But they are getting there. But I think there's still a bit of gap, which obviously that gap is where the opportunity lies.
It's more by way of comment than question, but I think that's a point to strongly underpin. One of the great applications, and the obviously great applications for blockchain, is identity. And yes, it is not a financial application per se, but it feeds into just about every other kind of financial use case, and therefore using the technology to plug into those financial applications, the sort of businesses that no doubt at the regulator we will be regulating, is an area of very profound interest to us. There is no doubt that the bulk of the world is not properly banked, is maybe not banked at all. There is simply not the payment infrastructure to support fundamental payment systems. And one very large part of that is 10 miles away from here. And it strikes me as a personal note, taking off my GFSC hat for a minute, that Gibraltar makes a very sound argument for being a so-called first world place, a developed jurisdiction, a developed world place that has every reason to take its technology and its businesses and focus it across the straits. There are huge opportunities in Africa that are simply not taken into account, and blockchain can solve a lot of problems, not just in the financial space. And we should see this jurisdiction as being a place to launch a lot of that. I think there are missed opportunities that we should be seizing.
I'm glad.
Say that with your experience in Hong Kong, a place that opened its doors to China and saw that explosion there, right?
I feel a whole new lens coming on. I think by the sounds of it, we've covered pretty well every question that the audience had, so I'd just like to thank the panel very much for that session.